Hi, it's Dwyer. It's November 20th, 2024. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, let me just say, here online, we try to talk about the biggest topics on the table in the sport of boxing, right? I don't have a secret agenda here. It's not like I want MVP promotions to succeed wildly and I feel a need to talk about Jake Paul, right? Understand, we've reached a point now in boxing where Jake Paul no longer has to tell you that he's one of the biggest stories in boxing. Rather, the sport is telling you that. So when you have a Hall of Famer, Carl Froch, an undisputed champion, Arthur Beterbiev, the Bridgerweight champion, the reigning Bridgerweight champion, Kevin Lorena, and now you have the heavyweight champion, Daniel Dubois, all calling out Jake Paul, all wanting to fight Jake Paul. Well, then the sport of boxing is telling you, folks, Jake Paul, right now at least, is the sport's biggest story. Right? So, what I also want people to think about is the boxing hierarchy. In my opinion, and life's unfair, there are two groups. There's the heavyweight champion, and then there's everyone else. Now, I want people to pause here just for a moment. The theory of this video is that of all the people calling out Jake Paul, the fight Jake Paul should take, in my opinion, it's the fight Jake Paul must take, is the fight against the heavyweight champion. Right? Understand, too, it doesn't have to be sanctioned. Sure, you have to be in the top 10 to have a chance at the title. Jake Paul doesn't officially need to win the title. Daniel Dubois doesn't officially have to put his title at risk for this fight to be a bonanza. Right? All Jake Paul has to do, he does not have to win the fight. All he has to do is look good for a couple of moments. You understand, if there is any film footage of Jake Paul landing a clean right hand, Jake Paul has an A-level right hand on Daniel Dubois, if there's any footage of Jake Paul dazing Dubois, backing up Dubois, then whatever actually happens in the fight, the winner could be Dubois by stoppage. Whatever actually happens in the fight would be the secondary highlight. The main highlight would be that Jake Paul, against the reigning heavyweight champion, entered the ring and landed some shots. That by itself would raise his profile. That by itself would put himself in the history books. Well, let's talk about it. Let me ask a question. Let's engage the listenership here. What's your walkaway number? What's the number that you would accept to do an event, win, lose, or draw, then walk away from your career? Right? If they came to you, if you're a professional prize fighter, and they said, how much would we have to offer you to walk away from the rest of your career, what would that number be? Now, understand, Jake Paul just made, according to reports, $40 million Again, $40 million to fight Mike Tyson. Somebody on that card that was watched by 60 million households made a lot of money. Right? Reports say it was Jake Paul. The reports also say that Mike Tyson made $20 million. Right? Tyson, in essence, walked away from some of his reputation by taking this fight. An argument can be made that his walkaway number was $20 million. So if they came to you and said, here's what we're offering you to fight the heavyweight champion in a fight that you're unlikely to win, in a fight that, quite frankly, you might be embarrassed in, what number would it take? If I'm Jake Paul, if they came up to $40 million, I'd take the deal. Here's why. Number one, I'm not just a fighter. I actually own a huge part of MVP Promotions. Right? I'm a businessman. Maybe I'm risking my boxing career, but I'm actually enhancing my other business ventures. Right? People will know, even if I get blown out, that I took myself so seriously as a boxer that I accepted the ultimate challenge to fight the reigning heavyweight champion. Right, folks? I know there's going to be a group out there, and they were right on the Tyson fight. Right? You know, that group's going to include people like Tyson Fury. That group's going to come forward, maybe Eddie Hearn. That group's going to come forward and they're going to say, this fight's a joke. This man doesn't deserve to be in the ring with the reigning heavyweight champion. Right? But understand where they were all wrong. Jake Paul cleared a lot of dollars, didn't he? Jake Paul filled that arena in Texas, didn't he? Jake Paul had Netflix subscribers tuning in by the millions. Right? The critics can be critics. Just understand, when it came to the money, they were dead wrong. Dead wrong on this Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight. How wrong were they? Multiple champions now want to fight Jake Paul. I don't recall Arthur Beterbiev having that much of an interest in fighting Jake Paul. I don't recall Daniel Dubois feeling a need to call out Jake Paul before this fight. So, just understand, Jake Paul, the businessman, would enhance his publicity, his chances of recruiting fighters in the future by talking about how he himself fought the heavyweight champion. Right? And of course, if Jake Paul gets lucky, if he lands that big shot that drops Daniel Dubois, right, folks, that would be the stuff of legend, wouldn't it? Right? So let me just say this. The money's there. I mentioned in yesterday's video that I thought Carl Froch would bring with him Wembley and tens of thousands of fans. Folks, so too would Daniel Dubois. Right? The money would be there. The interest would be there for the fight. You can imagine. In the promo, they'd be talking about how Jake Paul has already beaten a former heavyweight champion, Mike Tyson. Right? In selling the fight, you can imagine. There'd be film clips of Jake Paul circling Mike Tyson, making Mike Tyson look like his feet were in cement. There would, of course, also be videos of Jake Paul knocking out people like Nate Robinson, Tyron Woodley. The fight would certainly resonate with casual boxing fans. They might even start hearing about how a guy in his first pro fight, the reigning Olympic gold medalist Pete Rademacher, fought Floyd Patterson and actually had his moments in that fight. Right? The idea is that an ambitious guy, a problem child, who's true to the craft, would have a shot on the heavyweight champion. Isn't that really the storyline? A variation of it in the movie Rocky, which of course won Best Picture in the 1970s. But let me make another point here, and it's a boxing point. I want people to revisit the Hrgovic-Daniel Dubois fight. What's Jake Paul's best weapon? I would say it's that straight right hand. What's the punch that Philippe Hrgovic is landing repeatedly on Daniel Dubois from early in their fight? Folks, it's the straight right hand. Right, folks, you cannot land that straight right hand that easily on Carl Froch, Arthur Beterbiev, or Kevin Lerena. Right? Understand, style-wise, and I know it's a shocker to say this, but style-wise, the best opponent for Jake Paul is Daniel Dubois. Jake Paul now has legs. He can move around. If he's able to stop and pop, if he's able to throw that straight right hand, understand it's Dubois who's willing to take it to trade with you. In other words, this fight might actually be exciting. Let me also point out, too, that Beterbiev does not allow guys to linger. Right? You understood. Joe Smith was on the clock. You understood. The Anthony Yarde fight's interesting. Yarde comes out and he's on the balls of his feet. He's dancing. Right? Beterbiev, of course, is looking at him. Beterbiev's the one trying to shorten the distance. You understood Beterbiev was not going to look at him for 12 rounds. You understood Beterbiev's game was to apply constant pressure. You understood sooner or later Yarde was going to be forced to fight back. Yarde was going to be forced to go flat-footed. That's not quite the feeling you get with Daniel Dubois, is it? Right? How many rounds did Joe Joyce go with Daniel Dubois? Daniel Dubois allows guys to linger, doesn't he? Right? Usyk gets knocked down. When Usyk gets up, one would have thought that Daniel Dubois would have thought, you know what, this is my moment to be heavyweight champion. Now, it worked out for Dubois. He ultimately won the belt, outside of Usyk. But you thought that Dubois was going to be on Usyk like white on rice. Instead, Usyk gets up. Now, I know the ref blows the call. My opinion, it's my video. I know many of you disagree. Okay, let's agree to disagree. But even after 5 minutes, if you're the guy who hit Usyk with a body shot and Usyk went down, you thought Dubois would come in and would just start roughhousing. Think about what a prime Mike Tyson would do. What I want people to do, better yet, is look at the Lennox Lewis, Michael Grant film. Right? The minute Lewis starts to feel that Grant is hurt, folks, Lewis is all in. Look at the Lewis-Andrew Galata fight. Right? There's certain guys who aren't going to watch you when you're hurt, aren't going to allow you to recover. This third guy in the ring, the ref, okay, he missed the call. I'm the guy who threw the punch. I didn't miss the call. You and I know you're hurt. You and I know I want your title. In fact, on a deeper level, I don't even care what you're thinking. I want your title. I think you're hurt. I'm emptying the gun. Was that the feeling you got after Usyk, one of the biggest moments in recent memory in the heavyweight division? After Usyk got off the canvas, was it your feeling that the Dubois mindset was, I'm going to end this fight now? I'm going to let this guy know, hey, player, I don't even think you're better than me. In fact, I think you're hurt in this fight. Was that the mindset you got? We've all seen shootouts. Right? We've all seen shootouts. Think back to Hagler-Hearns. When Hearns finally breaks, is there any hesitation that Marvin Hagler has with regard to trying to close the show that round? Right, folks, I would say that that's the mindset Beterbiev has. He's not going to watch you staggering around the ring and not think he's going to close the show. You know that. Lucien Bute, a guy I thought would beat Carl Froch. When he gets hurt, folks, that fight's over. Carl Froch goes in for the kill. Of these fighters, it's Daniel Dubois who sometimes leaves you puzzled. You know, you are looking at him against Joe Joyce. You know Joe Joyce's plan A. He's riddling Dubois with a jab. That's obvious. You're looking at Dubois, you're thinking whatever Dubois' plan A is, it's not working out. He's getting hit with the jab. How long did Dubois stay in that zone? Several rounds? Longer than Beterbiev would have stayed in that zone? Longer than Carl Froch would have stayed in that zone? So understand, style-wise, if I'm Jake Paul, and I know this is going to sound hopelessly unfair, more people are interested in watching you fight a reigning champion than a past champion. Right? Dubois is current. Carl Froch, as Hall of Fame as he was, is more past. Right? Understand, too, there is a bias. The heavyweight division is flooded with classic title fights. Right? You know, that first Ali Fraser fight, my goodness. Right? That was a big event. I would argue that in my life, that's probably the biggest boxing event that there's been. Right? You've had other big fights that were highly touted beforehand. Mayweather-Pacquiao, for example. Neither Mayweather nor Pacquiao was a reigning heavyweight champion. It's just different. Right? Well, understand, if you're talking about the biggest fights of the last, 60 years, you also have the Rumble in the Jungle. Folks, my goodness, that's a big event, isn't it? I know there's some fights that have legendary status, right? The Valentine's Day Massacre. Sugar Ray Robinson against the Raging Bull Jake LaMotta, right? You do have some fights in history that aren't heavyweight fights, that had, that have huge reputations. But let's face it, there's nothing quite like these heavyweight fights, is there? Even casual fans know about Joe Louis against Rocky Marciano. Right? You know, one of my favorite fights in history happened more than 100 years ago, July 4th, 1910. Jack Johnson against Jim Jeffries. Folks, these are heavyweight fights. The heavyweight division has more weight than everything else. Right? Some guys who managed upsets are some of the most known people in boxing. Buster Douglas, he takes Tyson's title. We still remember the Buster Douglas name. Who's the middleweight or the lightweight who you remember that guy's name for an upset he pulled? About as good as it gets is Randy Turpin. Right? He famously beat Sugar Ray Robinson. Many of you are scratching your heads, asking the question, who's Randy Turpin? Right, that's the point. Whereas Andy Ruiz, we all know who he is. So let me just say, if I'm Jake Paul, it's not close. If I'm thinking legacy, if I'm really a businessman and I'm already at 27 thinking about what my life's going to be at 35, right? I'm thinking about meeting up with some young heavyweight prospect, and I want to dazzle the guy like a college recruiter would. And I want the guy to sign with my MVP promotions in part because of who he thinks I am. Right? What's the winning line? Is it, hey, you saw me in there, beat Carl Froch? Or, you might not know this, but I fought the undisputed light heavyweight champion. Is that the winning line, or is the winning line, when I fought for the heavyweight championship? When I fought for the heavyweight championship, I staggered Daniel Dubois. Right? What would be most meaningful to you if Jake Paul were to win the big fight? Jake Paul beats Carl Froch, a guy who's been retired for several years? Jake Paul, who just fought at 227, beat the reigning 175-pound undisputed champion? Jake Paul beat the Bridgerweight. Is Bridgerweight, again, a new division, really on par historically with the heavyweight division? Can't even casual fans name you several heavyweight champions? Right? Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis. This is just off the top of my head. Muhammad Ali, Lennox Lewis, Larry Holmes. Right? How many great lightweight champions can you name? Right? Understand. You have some greats in history who've been forgotten. Who remembers Benny Leonard? At middleweight, who remembers Stanley Ketchel? The boxing hardcore does. Right? Archie Moore at light heavyweight. Right? Understand, everyone remembers heavyweights. We even remember Buster Douglas and Andy Ruiz. Right? We remember heavyweights. So you're Jake Paul. Daniel Dubois will let you throw a straight right hand on him. Right? If there's someone you need to talk to about that, just pick up the phone and call Philippe Bergovic. All you have to do, in fact, is listen to the telecast. You don't even have to see it. The boxing commentator did an outstanding job in the telecast talking about the straight right hands that Bergovic's landing. It was shocking at the time. Well, if you're Jake Paul, you've knocked out a few guys with your straight right hand. You understand that if you show some movement, you might be able to survive a few rounds. Didn't Richard Lardy survive a few rounds, for crying out loud, against Daniel Dubois? Right? All you have to do is look serious, land some big shots. If the person watching the fight on their sofa sees you landing some big shots on the heavyweight champion, there's going to be bedlam in that household. So let me just say, folks, if I'm Jake Paul, I wouldn't think twice. Let me just say, AJ was the mandatory for Daniel Dubois. So Dubois has, a voluntary he can make. If I'm Daniel Dubois, I have a choice. I can fight some roughneck heavyweight, right? I could fight a Martin Bacoli who'd be coming for my title in some blood and guts battle, right? I can have real opposition. Or I can fight a guy who, the fight before his last fight, came in weighing 200 pounds. Right? I can fight a guy who probably wants to fight me in the UK. In other words, I don't have to travel to Saudi Arabia. I can sleep in my own bed. I can hang out with my mates. I can be in front of my people, making big money just like I did against Anthony Joshua in a venue in which I've won before. Right? You know what they would call a Daniel Dubois Jake Paul fight? A blockbuster. Right? Let's say Jake Paul gets knocked out early. Let's say that I'm a young prospect. I'm a young heavyweight, or I'm a young middleweight. And it's 5 years down the road. And Jake Paul comes in. And Jake Paul's trying to recruit me. He wants my signature on a contract. He wants to be my promoter. Now, let's just say a lot of guys are going to look at these Jake Paul promotions and they're going to say, wow, they made a lot of money. But let's get into the boxer mindset. These boxers are warriors. They are. Right? You walk in and you're talking and they're looking at you, and you know what they're going to be thinking. This guy's a warrior like me. This guy understands who I am. I don't even think the question of why did you fight the heavyweight champion even needs to be asked. It's understood. Right? It's understood. Why did I fight the heavyweight champion? Because he's the one who had the belt. Right? So let me just say, if in fact everyone's serious and they're not just feeding reporters lines to get their name in the paper and to be conversational, if in fact Daniel Dubois is seriously considering fighting Jake Paul, I hope Queensberry picks up the phone and calls MVP Promotions and makes it happen. Understand, few cultures in the world know how to put on a fight better than the British. Understand, a fight at Wembley would have several people in the building, right? David Haye, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, right? You would have several people, Frank Bruno, Lennox Lewis, right? You would have several boxing dignitaries either in the building or ready to give interviews after the fight. Right? If there's a moment in the fight, if lightning strikes and Jake Paul lands a big straight right, let's remember, Kevin Lorena put down Daniel Dubois. Dubois hits the canvas multiple times in that fight. Right? That's the other thing. You want to fight an opponent who you feel you can hurt. Right? You understand you hit Beterbiev hard. That brother seems to always stay on his feet unless he's fighting Callum Johnson. Right? You hit Dubois hard, Dubois might go down. Right? We'll see what happens. Was not my intention to talk about Jake Paul in 3 consecutive videos. He made it a reality by drawing 60 million households to his fight against Mike Tyson, and then by being called out by some boxing dignitaries, serious fighters, a Hall of Famer, an undisputed champion. the reigning Bridgerweight champion, and now the reigning heavyweight champion. Given those choices, Jake, fight the reigning heavyweight champion. Think about your life 5 years from now. Right? You don't want a kid asking you, why didn't you fight the heavyweight champion? He called you out. You don't want to explain to the kid that you made a calculated decision not to take maximum risks. That's not what works. This is a situation that's kind of like a Willie Hutton situation. Willie Sutton, where they said, why do you rob banks? And his response was, because that's where the money is. Why do you fight the heavyweight champion? Because you just weighed 227 in a fight. Because you just beat a former heavyweight champion in a fight at heavyweight. And the heavyweight champ called you out. It's that simple. Right? For the boxing hardcore, you also realize that Jake Paul throws a pretty good straight right hand, and that Daniel Dubois is not blessed and gets hit by straight right hands, and that Dubois does have problems with an opponent who moves. Right? And that some of Dubois' opponents came straight to him. Jarrell Miller. Right? You're not going to come straight to him. You're going to come in at angles. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.